Last night's anime episode featured some pretty fluid looking animation, and the thing that really keeps standing out to me is how the Advanced Conqueror's Haki sound that they use for Luffy, Kaido, and Yamato, this sound effect right here, so that sound effect is reserved for King's Haki, and yet it's literally the same sound that they used for Jinbei's finisher against Who's Who. The Gorosei, the five elders, were first introduced in chapter 233 of the series, which, according to the One Piece wiki, came out in June of 2002. That means it took us almost 21 years to find out what one of the name of the elders was. You know, whenever I'm reading One Piece, I definitely always feel that Oda values and respects my time as a reader, especially with how he ended things in Wano. Now, frustrations aside, I do think that if Oda had revealed this name earlier on, I think he would have ended up revealing a huge chunk of information that would have essentially confirmed where the story is going and where it's been. So he didn't want to show his hand that early. So today we're going to be going over the implications of Mr. J. Garcia Saturn, as well as one of the most controversial fights in recent One Piece history that has fans debating back and forth. And of course, I'm talking about the fight between Edward Weevil and Aramki Greenbull. What happened? Did the fight actually take place? We'll be taking a look at that stuff and more, starting with the Mats cover page. So, just like the real Albert Einstein, it appears that Vegapunk was able to secure a Nobel Prize. The real one actually got it in physics, where it seems that Vegapunk is actually getting the One Piece world equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize for discovering a way to turn ammo into flowers. We get final confirmation that Stussy was in fact the secret ally that Vegapunk reached out to for help. So I think what likely happened is that Miss Buckingham, or Miss Bocking, made a deal with Vegapunk in the past, like a trade, an exchange, a clone for a clone. Vegapunk gets Stussy, a clone of Miss Buckingham, and Miss Buckingham ends up getting a clone of Whitebeard. Then again, the Oda box says that Miss Bocking is a Mads freeloader, so that gets me to think that maybe she just straight up stole Weevil from the lab. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that she genuinely cares about him. I mean, she seems pretty distraught that he was taken away. But more on that whole thing later. Stussy uses her own variation of Kamiye, which is the dodging technique of the Rokishi style. The whole point of the technique is to make your body as light as paper so that you move before you get hit. So she dodges what appears to be a Shigan, and then she counters by weakening Lucci with a Kaitoseki / Sea Stone lipstick. And I know that Sea Stone is pretty rare, like it's not something that you just find everywhere in the world of One Piece, but I would like to see more of this. It's just like a smart weapon of choice, and we don't really see a lot of characters using it. I especially thought we were going to see more of this in Wano, because that's where Kaitoseki is from, but I think all we got, in addition to the handcuffs and udon, was that nail that Hawkins used on Law. So yeah, I appreciate Stussy using it to weaken Lucci, bites his neck, puts him to sleep, and then Hattori's like, "How in the heck?" There's a small little panel that Oda drew of the bird just staring at the motionless bodies of Lucci and Kaku, which I thought was really funny. The wings of the Pirate King have a brief role in this chapter against the Seraphim. In order to protect Lilith, Zoro gets involved, and he has a brief clash with S-Hawk. And we still haven't gotten any confirmation about whether or not the Seraphims are capable of using Haki, but given what we've seen, I don't think it's likely. So each of the wings ends up saving a satellite each. Sanji ends up outrunning an explosion. So we get another reminder of how fast Sanji can move. And since Wano, we learned that if he really wants to move, he can literally go invisible because of how fast he can go. So he saves Edison. We find that Stussy has tied up Kaku and Lucci with Sea Stone, and then given this hierarchy of authority that the Seraphims respond to, it's pretty clear that one of the main reasons for why Oda decides to bring one of the Gorosei into the arc is because he has the utmost authority over the Seraphim. So even though the Seraphim currently respond to the orders of Vegapunk and the satellites, it definitely won't stay that way for very long. And just like I was surprised to find out that Miss Bocking genuinely cares about Weevil, I was also kind of surprised to find that this elder seems to have some degree of reservation in regards to the fact that he knows that Vegapunk has to be eliminated here. Because in the official translation, it does say, "I must say that I find this turn of events to be most regrettable." So it's not just regrettable, it's most regrettable that he knows that Vegapunk has to die. And it's not like he's saying that, oh, like, you know, me and Vegapunk, we go way back, like we're really good friends. No, he says, I only met him once in the past, just once in the past. So the regret that he feels has to go beyond whatever connection he has or, you know, had briefly with Vegapunk. Now I want to go back to the beginning really quick for a moment, because Shaka says something that I thought quite interesting. He says that Stussy has been on their side for over 2 decades. And so that statement kind of supports my suspicion that I've talked about in my previous videos about how I don't think that Stussy is a clone that ages normally. I think that Stussy is a clone that actually ages a lot slower than a normal person. Next thing, there's a small panel of Pythagoras and York, and we see that York is asleep. So I'm wondering if that's going to create some kind of complication later on when it comes to escaping. I also think it's kind of weird that we get a narrator box by the end of the Egghead section of the chapter that says, "But an incident had occurred. Dr. Vegapunk's Stella was nowhere to be found." So does this mean that Vegapunk actually did disappear? Like, not just figuratively, like, I can't find this person so they disappeared. No, like, this narrator box makes it seem as if he's not there anymore. Like, did him and Bonnie just warp away into Kuma's memories or something? Because if not, then why would Oda place a narrator box there with information that we already know? And then another important chunk of dialogue comes from Zoro. When he clashes with S-Hawk, he says, "Now that I get a better look at you, you're actually a little more human than him." That's a pretty interesting line that Zoro has, like, because it means that he doesn't think that Mihawk is human. And the question is, why does he think that? Is it because Mihawk's ability with a sword is considered to be superhuman? Like, is this Zoro saying that Mihawk is at such a high level that he's sort of beyond human understanding and comprehension? Could it have anything to do with the fact that S-Hawk is apparently sweating? Or is he actually saying that Mihawk lacks empathy and that maybe Mihawk is responsible for Zoro losing an eye? So a pretty obvious conclusion that people have been drawing from the elder's name is that since the guy's name is Saturn, and since we know that there's 5 elders total, would that then mean then that the remaining 4 elders are named Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter? I think yes and no is the correct answer here. Because if you look at the name of the ancient weapons, Neptune is not called Neptune. She's called Poseidon, and Poseidon is obviously the Greek god of the sea. So I think we might end up getting a mixture of Greek and Roman mythology in regards to the names of the Gorosei. For example, Mars might not be called Mars, he might be called Ares. Mercury might be called Hermes. However, I do think that whoever represents Venus and Jupiter are actually going to be called Venus and Jupiter, because Venus in Greek mythology is known as Aphrodite. So that'd be kind of a weird name for an elder, you know, Mr. Aphrodite. And then Jupiter in Greek mythology would be Zeus, and that name is already taken by another character. Kind of like with King Neptune taking Poseidon's name. So I think Jupiter and Venus are going to be Jupiter and Venus, and then maybe we'll get Hermes and Ares. Now, I'm sure most of you have already read that the name J. Garcia could be a reference to Jerry Garcia, who was a famous musician. But the name Garcia, just by itself, is super interesting because it's super popular in Spanish, right? You know, I think that's pretty obvious. And if you look at the origin of the name, some researchers that try to find the origin of the name actually came to the conclusion that the name might mean bear. So obviously we have Kuma in this arc playing a pretty important role. We're not sure what the deal with him is yet. He also has an attack called Urususushuk or Ursushuk. That could be a reference to the constellation of the Big Dipper, also known as Ursa Major. If you connect the stars, people say that it kind of has the shape of a bear. And we also know that Kuma is part of a special people. So is there a connection there? Now, another part of this is that the name Garcia is also very similar to another word in Spanish, which is garza. And garza in Spanish means heron, which is a bird similar to the crane. And then I also looked up the coat of arms for the Garcia family, right, in Spain. And the coat of arms actually looks like it has a bird on it, like a crane, a heron. The name Garcia is represented by a heron. That's the shield of the house. That's the coat of arms. And so I automatically thought about the Kazuki logo and how that sort of has like a bird or a crane on it, with what appears to be some celestial bodies floating under it. Another fun fact is that in ancient times, a very, very long time ago, before the planets were known as planets, people that would study the sky noticed 5 celestial bodies. Okay, and these 5 celestial bodies eventually turned out to be Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they noticed that these 5 bodies up in the sky moved relative to the stars. So before they were known as planets, those 5 celestial bodies were actually known as the 5 wandering stars, which is very fitting considering that another name for the Gorosei is the 5 elder stars. Now, if we dive into the mythology a bit more when it comes to the names of the Gorosei and the ancient weapons, we know that Pluton is the god of the underworld, right? Hades, Pluton, Hades. We know that Uranus is the god of the sky. We know that Poseidon is the god of the sea, god of water. And then Saturn, in Roman mythology, was considered to be the god of time. And time has been a huge theme in this arc, because we have Bonnie being able to age people up and down, you know, distorted features and stuff. We have Vegapunk wanting to discover the weight of memory, a trip to the past potentially with Kuma's memories. We also have the fact that Egghead is supposed to be the land of the future, but it's also representative of the past technology. We have Kizaru in this arc as well, and his light power and Vegapunk's experiments based off of Kizaru's light power. And so that could connect to time as well, depending on where Oda wants to take it. Like if he wants to do something with light speed. By the way, I think it's clear that the reason for why Kizaru asks Saturn if he knows Vegapunk is because Kizaru definitely does. Now, under the assumption that the rest of the Gorosei are also going to be referencing a planet each, I think that also lends more credibility to the theory about the 4 gods of Skypiea actually being real. So we got Luffy, who's the god of the sun. We don't know who the god of the forest is, and we don't know who the god of the rain is. But if we follow the aligned naming sequence of the Gorosei plus the ancient weapons, then I think this chapter pretty much just confirmed that there has to be a god of the earth somewhere. A good question to ask here would be, why is the castle where the Gorosei live called Pangaea Castle? Could it potentially be a reference to a time in the world of One Piece where islands didn't exist? Maybe it was just a giant chunk of earth and all the islands were connected with each other in one piece. And maybe the god of the earth did something to tear apart that landmass. Now, something that I've always suspected, and I think this chapter sort of confirms my suspicion, is that even though we've been told that there's a balance of 3 powers in the world of One Piece, or there used to be a balance of 3 powers because the Shichibukai system doesn't exist anymore. But even before then, I had my suspicions that this whole concept, this whole idea that there's always been like 3 main powers to maintain stability in the world, there's a part of me that always felt that that was just a straight up lie. I think it's a lie, just like the lie of the empty throne. Because I think there's actually always been 4 powers, but the 4th one is actually hidden. It's secret. Because the government tells people that there's nobody sitting on the empty throne, nobody's in charge of ruling the world, there's no king of the world, which is false. And then the government also tells people that the Marines are the only enforcers of the government's will, which is also false because we literally saw Imu wipe out an entire island by using a secret weapon. And this goes back to how Doflamingo was able to blackmail the government because he knows what the 4th power is. He's seen it. And if the people were to discover what that is, it would cause an uprising, right? A massive rebellion, which by the way is already taking place, but it would accelerate that. It goes back to that scene at the end of Dressrosa where we see Akainu angry at the Gorosei. He's like, why do we have to bend down for Doflamingo? What's so special about him? And then the Gorosei tell him like, don't talk to us about stuff that you don't understand, Sakazuki. The Marines are just the public face of the government. The public face, meaning that the Marines are the mask that the government uses to distract people from the existence of the 4th great power. Now imagine that Weevil is being taken to Impel Down, which is where Dofi is. And Dofi's ultimate goal is to be able to destroy everything that the Celestial Dragons rule over because he's upset that he hasn't been able to regain his status after his father moved his family away from Marijoa. So it'd be interesting to see if Doflamingo and Weevil can somehow orchestrate a prison break from Impel Down, and then maybe Doflamingo can get his crew back, because we know that at least Senor Pink is being held in Impel Down, according to Vegapunk. I think a big part of this too is going to depend on what Marco actually decides to do. Is he going to try and go get Weevil back as a thank you for him protecting the island? Is he going to reunite with some of the Whitebeard pirates that we haven't seen in a while, like Jozu and Vista? Now Doflamingo has always wanted to team up with Crocodile, and he's definitely getting the newspaper delivered to him in prison. So I'm sure he already knows about Cross Guild. So if he breaks out with his crew and Weevil together, they might go and find Crocodile. Also, there's a panel in chapter 1059 where we see Boa and she's really worried about not knowing where to go because she can't really stay in Amazon Lily anymore now that she's not a Shichibukai, because as long as she's there, the Marines are going to try and show up to capture her. So she's worried about where she's going to go. And in that panel, you see some sand floating in the background. So I'm pretty sure that that's a hint that Crocodile is there. So he might end up recruiting her to join Cross Guild. So I do think that it's possible that Oda might be setting things up so that Yonko Buggy ends up getting one of the strongest crews in the history of One Piece by the final war. There's also that scene during the Oden flashback where Buggy gets sick right before Roger goes to Laugh Tale, and Shanks decides to stay behind with Buggy to take care of him. And then Shanks tells Oden and Roger that if they ever go, they will be going on their own ships, meaning both him and Buggy will be going to Laugh Tale. And then the last time we saw Shanks, he did say that he was finally going to make a move for the One Piece. So it might be that Oda's moving some pieces to make Cross Guild grow so that ultimately all these characters end up heading to Laugh Tale along with Buggy. So these 4 Yonko crews are definitely bound to intersect at some point. Now, when it comes to the Sphinx Island situation, one of the first things that's obvious is that the island seems pretty well kept. It's not destroyed or anything. In fact, it looks pretty much identical to the way that we last saw it before Marco left, which is really strange considering how we saw that Greenbull's power works in Wano, where he literally just walks and he just makes plants and trees and all these things grow. Like, he changes the terrain and makes it greener absent-mindedly. And then Weevil, whenever we've seen him, the background is always full of fire and destruction. I remember when he was first introduced, there was literally a ship inland. Like, why is there a ship this far away from the water? Did he just throw it or something? Oh, and speaking of ships, it's good to know that the battleship that Aramaki requested at the end of Wano actually was used for something, because I always thought it was kind of weird that he requested a ship and then we didn't really get to see the purpose of it. But I guess it's the one that he's using to carry Weevil away. Now, based off of the Marines that we see arrive at Sphinx Island, I think it's pretty clear that the Marines' recruitment standards have dropped. And that goes back to what Jinbei says back in Fishman Island, which is that after Aokiji left, the government actually took measures to make up for that loss, which ended up granting the Marines pretty frightful power. So I guess now they're open to recruiting anybody, even if they're criminals. It kind of reminds me of what happens sometimes when a country goes to war and they need more people to join the army. So then the government turns to people that are in prison. And so the prisoners are told that if they join the army, their sentence will get reduced or it'll be taken away altogether. Now, the guy that looks like a badger is literally sort of repeating something that Greenbull said in Wano, which is that if you're not affiliated with the world government, you don't have any human rights. And we get further evidence that Weevil is actually, in fact, a Whitebeard clone, because when he shows up, he literally does like the Whitebeard swing. And again, this goes back to what Pythagoras says about the Seraphims, about how their attack patterns evolve as they grow, and that DNA actually records individual experiences. So Weevil caring this much about Sphinx Island might be due to the fact that since he is a clone, he has some of Whitebeard's memories in him. And so given that Sphinx was a place that Whitebeard really cared about, it could be that it was a part of Weevil's biology to protect the island. Like, Baking even highlights Weevil having a very noble heart, and I think that's a pretty clear reference to the behavior that we saw from Whitebeard in Marineford. Like, for example, when he literally splits the plaza in two and separates himself from his crew so that his crew can actually get a chance to escape. And again, in chapter 802, we have a Marine say that wherever Weevil goes, he always causes a ton of collateral damage, a lot of casualties. And again, this is further supported by that warning that we see appears about him in the newspaper. So given the information that we have, it's pretty obvious that Weevil decided to prioritize the safety of the island and its civilians, just like Whitebeard would. Otherwise, the island would look very different. And I think we would have gotten way more injured people than we actually see here by the end. And we would have gotten to see way more damage from both sides. In the official translation, there's one kid that tells Marco, if that big guy didn't show up, this village would have been done for. And then Miss Bakken says, Admiral Ryokugu showed up, and all our efforts were in vain. And this is where it gets really confusing, because I'm like, what efforts? And from who, right? You know, what effort? The effort to protect the village? Because it seems like the village and the people living there are okay. Efforts to do what? Like, when she says our efforts, does she mean that everybody in the town, including herself and Weevil, were trying to jump Greenbull and that Greenbull just no-diffed everybody? Could it mean that maybe Greenbull offered Weevil an ultimatum and said, you either come with me willingly or we go at it here and we destroy the entire village? Did Greenbull make Weevil an offer that he just couldn't refuse? And if that's the case, why is Weevil yelling out for his mom? But then also, how come Greenbull didn't capture Miss Bokkins as well? Like, why did he leave Miss Bokkins alone? When Miss Bokkins says that our efforts were in vain, could it mean that her efforts and the residents of Sphinx Island were trying to convince Weevil not to go, but he decided against that? Because we've seen very strong characters get captured before. Like with Kaido, right? Ever since his introduction, we knew that he had been captured by the Marines several times before in the past. And then during the mini flashback that we got from him, we learned that he actually would let himself be captured because he was starving and the Marines would feed him. So I do think that this whole thing is being left vague on purpose for both Weevil and Greenbull's benefit. And this is supported by how we've seen Oda handle the admirals in the story. Because when Oda uses the admirals in the story, there's typically always like an asterisk, like a parentheses that says something like, oh, by the way, they weren't really trying. Or by the way, they're limited in their ability to go all out because of where they're fighting. In Marineford, there's this whole speech from Sengoku about how Marine HQ, the actual physical structure of Marine HQ, is considered to be a symbol by some people around the world. And it's a symbol of justice and hope. So they can't let the pirates destroy the physical structure. But that also acts as a limitation for them, for the Marines, because they can't go all out. Otherwise, they would destroy the place as well. Tensei, Black Horse, says something similar to this as well about what happened in Marijoa, where Greenbull and Fujitora were fighting the revolutionaries, but they had to keep their powers in check because they didn't want to destroy the Holy Land. Well, and this also goes into the power of the off-screen no Mi, which was also applied during Aokiji versus Akainu's fight. It's a powerful thing, you know, the off-screen no Mi. It's only rivaled in power by the silhouette no Mi. In fact, legend has it that they're actually one and the same, that it's the same powerful fruit. Because really the point of that power is that it allows you to not show shit. No, but I do think that the whole reason for Oda keeping us in the dark about the Greenbull and Weevil confrontation is so that he can surprise us later on with both of them. You know, I actually have a video on each one. I have a video on why I think Admiral Awakenings are going to be broken as heck. And I also have a video on why Weevil is forgotten and why people should give him more credit. And I think this new development is definitely proof that Oda is heading in that direction and is gonna get there probably sooner than we think. While at the same time, I think that he's also getting ready. He's prepping up to reveal more and more about the fourth greatest power in the One Piece world, which of course, as we've talked about, is comprised of Imu, the Gorosei, and the secrets of Marijoa. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.